The universe, as it turns out, has a rather twisted sense of humor. It's the kind of cosmic joke that builds slowly, gathering momentum like a runaway freight train heading straight for a pride convention. The Zephyrian Empire, in all their purple-scaled glory and technological superiority, had spent the better part of 3 millennia cataloging species across 17 different star systems. They had a classification system that would make a bureaucrat weep with joy: categories, subcategories, threat assessments, and exploitation potential, all neatly organized in their vast databases. Humans, those peculiar bipedal mammals from the third rock orbiting a yellow dwarf star, had been classified as Level 2 non-threatening primitives. Right between harmless herbivores and decorative flora, the assessment had been thorough, or so Commander Korrath believed as he reviewed the reports from his flagship, the inevitable Conquest. The humans used crude chemical propulsion, fought among themselves with embarrassing frequency, and seemed primarily concerned with accumulating small green pieces of paper and broadcasting their meals to each other through primitive electromagnetic networks. "Absolutely pathetic," Korrath muttered, his 4 eyes scanning the data streams. No natural weapons, no enhanced physical capabilities, no telepathic abilities. They don't even have proper scales. He flexed his razor-sharp claws dismissively. Their biggest predator is some striped feline that weighs maybe 300 of their measurement units. The irony detector in the universe began to hum with anticipation. Korrath had a problem, though. The Zephyrian High Command had been pressuring him to field test their latest bioweapon against a real population. The Shadowmaw, their crowning achievement in predatory engineering, needed live subjects to prove its worth before the next galactic expansion. The creature had been designed by their finest geneticists, combining the stealth capabilities of the void wraiths from Kepler 442b with the hunting instincts of the Bloodmaw stalkers from the Andromeda Rift. It stood nearly 3 meters tall, possessed adaptive camouflage that made it effectively invisible, and could track prey across entire continents using scent molecules that were days old. Perfect, Korrath decided, authorizing the deployment with a casual flick of his tail. Let's see how our pet performs against these humans. Should be over in a few rotations. The cosmic irony detector's humming grew louder. The Shadowmaw materialized on Earth during what the locals called Tuesday morning, a designation that would have confused Korrath had he bothered to care about human temporal conventions. The creature's transport pod landed in a dense forest in Montana, a region the Zephyrian scouts had identified as sparsely populated by the target species with minimal technological presence. The Shadowmaw emerged from its pod with the confidence of a being that had never known failure. Its bioluminescent neural pathways pulsed with satisfaction as it analyzed its surroundings. Primitive wooden structures dotted the landscape, clearly the nesting sites of the prey species. The air carried thousands of scent markers, carbon-based life forms, combustion engines, and something the creature's enhanced olfactory system identified as processed meat products wrapped in cylindrical casings. Hot dogs. Had the Shadowmaw possessed the cultural context to understand such things? But it didn't, and therein lay the first crack in the Zephyrian master plan. The creature's previous hunts had been textbook affairs. The silicon-based crystalline collective on Rigel Fess had put up a decent fight, but their logic-based society couldn't adapt quickly enough to an opponent that defied their mathematical predictions. The gas-breathing flotilla nomads of the Horsehead Nebula had lasted slightly longer, but their hive mind structure meant that once the Shadowmaw disrupted their central consciousness, the entire population became easy pickings. Humans, the creature assumed, would be even simpler. They appeared to be individual actors with no central coordination system. Their technology was laughably primitive. Most importantly, they seemed completely unaware of the basic principles of survival that govern civilized species throughout the galaxy. The Shadowmaw's first mistake was assuming that ignorance of galactic civilization equated to ignorance of survival. Its adaptive camouflage engaged as it approached the settlement. The technology was flawless, light-bending capabilities that rendered it functionally invisible to most known optical detection methods. Its footsteps made no sound on the forest floor, and its scent was completely masked by bio-dampening fields. By every measure that mattered in civilized warfare, the Shadowmaw was the perfect stealth predator. Unfortunately for the Shadowmaw, the residents of Pine Ridge, Montana, weren't exactly civilized by galactic standards. Ezra Blackwood noticed the missing dogs first. As the local park ranger, he kept tabs on the usual rhythms of his territory, and when Mrs. Patterson's beagle disappeared without a trace, followed by the Henderson family's retriever 2 days later, his instincts started pinging. 20 years in the Army Rangers had taught him to recognize when patterns changed, and the pattern around Pine Ridge was definitely shifting. "Could be a bear," he told Deputy Marshal Reeves over coffee at Millie's diner. "But bears don't usually take dogs clean without leaving traces. No blood, no torn collars, no nothing." Marlo Chen, the local mechanic whose hands seemed permanently stained with motor oil and whose brain worked like a Swiss watch, looked up from her breakfast. "Bears also don't leave tracks that disappear mid-stride," she said, dropping a set of photographs on the table. "Found these yesterday near where the beagle went missing." The photographs showed what appeared to be large, three-toed prints in the mud near the creek. The strange part wasn't the size, though they were definitely bigger than anything that belonged in Montana, but the way they simply stopped existing halfway across a clearing, as if whatever made them had suddenly learned to fly. Ezra studied the images with the methodical attention of someone who had spent years tracking things that didn't want to be found. "Well," he said finally, "that's not normal." The Shadowmaw, observing from the tree line with growing confusion, watched the humans pass around the photographs and engage in what its cultural database identified as collaborative problem-solving behavior. This was not supposed to happen. According to the Zephyrian intelligence reports, humans were highly territorial individuals who rarely cooperated beyond small family units. Its confusion deepened when, instead of cowering in their nesting structures, more humans began appearing in the forest. They carried primitive projectile weapons and moved in coordinated search patterns that displayed an uncomfortable familiarity with tracking techniques. Worse, they seemed to be sharing information through their electromagnetic communication devices, creating a real-time intelligence network that spanned the entire region. The creature's bioluminescent neural pathways flickered with something that might have been concern if Shadowmaws were capable of such emotions. Jenkins found more tracks up near Miller's Creek, Ezra announced to the growing crowd at the community center that evening. "Whatever this thing is, it's big, it's smart, and it's been watching us." "How do you know it's been watching us?" asked Marlo, though her tone suggested she already suspected the answer. "Because," Ezra said, pointing to a detailed map covered in red pins, "its movement pattern suggests reconnaissance. It's been circling our properties, testing our routines, learning our schedules. This isn't random predation, this is tactical assessment." The Shadowmaw, listening from outside the building through audio enhancement implants, felt its confidence waver for the first time in its engineered existence. The humans had not only detected its presence, but had correctly identified its behavioral patterns. Moreover, they were responding with organized countermeasures rather than panic or submission. This was definitely not in the mission briefing. The turning point came on Thursday night. The Shadowmaw had decided to take more aggressive action, reasoning that a direct attack would scatter the humans and return the situation to acceptable parameters. It selected an isolated farmhouse on the outskirts of town, approaching with the same stealth techniques that had served it well across a dozen worlds. What it found instead was the most elaborate trap it had ever encountered. Marlo Chen had spent 2 days converting farm equipment into what could generously be called defensive installations, and more accurately described as instruments of agricultural warfare. Motion sensors salvaged from security systems created overlapping detection grids. Floodlights rigged to car batteries could illuminate the entire property in seconds. Most impressive of all, she had somehow convinced Old Man Peterson to let her mount his combine harvester on a rotating platform, complete with a remote control system cobbled together from drone components and pure mechanical genius. "You turned a combine harvester into a turret," Ezra observed, genuinely impressed despite the circumstances. "Seemed like the practical thing to do," Marlo replied, testing the rotation mechanism. "Whatever this thing is, it's not expecting John Deere to enter the chat." The Shadowmaw approached the farmhouse with predatory confidence, its camouflage systems at full capacity. It had analyzed human agricultural technology and determined that their farming implements posed no threat to a properly equipped bioweapon. This assessment lasted right up until the motion sensors detected its heat signature and several tons of rotating farm machinery began tracking its movements with mechanical precision. The creature's first instinct was disbelief. Its second instinct was to retreat, which proved difficult when the humans had anticipated its likely escape routes and positioned additional equipment accordingly. The third instinct was panic, which set in around the time Marlo activated the floodlights, and the Shadowmaw found itself completely illuminated in the middle of what was essentially a mechanical killing field. "Well, hello there." Ezra's voice came through a hastily installed PA system. "We've been looking for you." The Shadowmaw's camouflage systems failed spectacularly under the combined assault of multiple light sources at different frequencies. For the first time since its creation, the creature found itself visible, exposed, and completely outmaneuvered by what it had assumed was primitive prey. Its desperate transmission back to the inevitable conquest was brief and increasingly frantic. Mission parameters incorrect. Humans display advanced tactical coordination. Request immediate extraction. Repeat, request immediate extraction. The response from Commander Korrath was predictably unsympathetic, negative, complete the mission. These are level 2 non-threatening primitives. Adapt and overcome. The Shadowmaw's final transmission came 3 hours later, as Pine Ridge's entire population of 237 people converged on Peterson's farm with an assortment of hunting rifles, farming equipment, and what appeared to be a homemade flamethrower that violated several interstellar weapons conventions. "They're everywhere," the creature reported, its bioluminescent neural pathways strobing with terror. "They coordinate without central command. They adapt faster than theoretical models predict. They weaponize their agricultural technology. This is not a level 2 species. This is not." The transmission ended abruptly. Commander Korrath stared at the communication console for several long moments, his 4 eyes blinking in sequence as he processed the implications of silence from his perfect predator. Around him, the bridge crew of the inevitable conquest maintained the kind of careful quiet that indicated they were all thinking the same thing, but nobody wanted to be the one to say it out loud. "Communications," Korrath said finally, his voice carrying the careful neutrality of someone trying not to acknowledge a massive miscalculation. "Any response from the Shadowmaw?" "Negative, Commander. Last transmission was 14 standard time units ago. Korrath's claws clicked against his command console as he reviewed the mission parameters. Level 2 non-threatening primitives. Simple field test. Routine deployment. The kind of operation they could complete with minimal oversight and maximum confidence. Except that somewhere down on that little blue planet, his perfect predator, the crowning achievement of Zephyrian bioengineering, had apparently been outmaneuvered by a species that still used combustion engines and thought faster than light travel was theoretical. "Sir," his tactical officer ventured, "should we deploy a recovery team?" Korrath considered this for exactly 3 seconds before his survival instincts kicked in. The same instincts that had kept him alive through 7 galactic campaigns and 3 separate court-martials all started screaming the same message. Sometimes retreat is the better part of valor, and sometimes admitting you made a mistake is infinitely preferable to compounding that mistake with additional resources. "Negative," he said, initiating a course correction that would take them to the far side of the system. "Update the human classification in our databases." "To what level, sir?" Korrath watched the blue planet shrink on his view screen and tried to calculate how he was going to explain this to High Command. The Shadowmaw had been designed to hunt apex predators, and it had apparently found one. The problem was that the apex predator in question appeared to be an entire species that had somehow weaponized agriculture and turned cooperative behavior into a tactical advantage. "Level 9, he said finally. "Extreme caution. Do not engage." His tactical officer's scales shifted to a pale shade of green, the Zephyrian equivalent of raised eyebrows. "Sir, Level 9 is reserved for species with interstellar military capabilities." "Yes," Korrath said, watching Earth disappear behind them. "I'm aware of the classification requirements." The report he eventually filed with High Command was a masterpiece of bureaucratic language and creative interpretation. Terms like unexpected tactical sophistication and novel approach to resource utilization featured prominently. The phrase "recommend extended observation period before future engagement" appeared no fewer than 7 times. What the report didn't mention was the part where a bioengineered killing machine had apparently been defeated by a park ranger, a mechanic, and a combine harvester with delusions of grandeur. Back on Earth, the residents of Pine Ridge, Montana, had already moved on to more pressing concerns, like whether the thing they'd buried behind Peterson's barn was going to attract any government attention, and whether Marlowe's modifications to the combine harvester were technically legal under agricultural equipment regulations. "Think there are more of those things out there?" Ezra asked, helping to clean up the improvised defense systems. "Probably," Marlowe said, disconnecting the last of the motion sensors. "But I doubt they'll be back anytime soon." She was, as it turned out, absolutely correct. The Zephyrian Empire had quietly added Earth to their list of systems to avoid, filed somewhere between hostile machine intelligence and weaponized stellar phenomena. The official designation was inhabited by species of uncertain classification with aggressive defensive capabilities. The unofficial designation, whispered in the darker corners of Zephyrian spacebars, was somewhat more direct. The place where the Shadowmaw went to die. And somewhere in the vast cosmic joke that is the universe, the irony detector finally powered down, its work complete. It had taken 3,000 years and one very surprised alien empire, but the point had been made. Sometimes the apex predator isn't the one with the biggest teeth, the best camouflage, or the most advanced bioengineering. Sometimes it's the one with the combine harvester and the attitude problem. The universe, as always, was quite pleased with itself.